Thank you for attending our webinar today, Key Metrics for Enterprise Application Software Performance. Today we have a global audience and almost 300 registrants for this major event. NOAA is pleased to be hosting this event for Forrester Software, where our key presenter is Jean-Pierre Garbani, a Vice President and Principal Analyst for Forrester Research. During the webinar, Jean-Pierre Garbani will share his view of essential KPI for system and user performance, how they can potentially improve IT service and support, reduce risk perhaps during change management, and do many other things to speed successful deployment and perhaps improve user satisfaction. Jean-Pierre will highlight new technologies that support this broader view of desktop performance, one that's certainly new to the industry. And then we will follow with a technology demonstration. Many of you know JP already, but to introduce JP again, Jean-Pierre Garbani is a Vice President, Principal Analyst serving infrastructure and operations professionals for Forrester. His focus is on predicting and quantifying IT disruptions. And his expertise is such that he spends a considerable amount of his time looking at new technologies and the early impacts they make. JP has several decades of real experience as an IT technology designer, marketeer, and client of many major corporations that built the products that you use. He has very broad experience in designing advanced technology solutions in both industrial and commercial apps and bringing them to market. He's written extensively on technology for several business publications over the years. JP is loved by our audiences and is by far our most popular webinar presenter. We're privileged and delighted that he's spending time with us today. And with that, I'm going to turn the event over to JP and make him our presenter for the day. So JP, with that, please take it away.
One of the characteristics of this is that it is essentially designed to monitor the infrastructure and the application itself. So it's looking at the infrastructure and it's working, and it's looking at the code of the application. Sometimes they would say it's looking at the end user, but we'll see that it is not exactly true. So next slide. So if we place ourselves in the end user shoes, in the client shoes, in the employee shoes, IT reports the wrong metrics because we're not concerned by, uptime at the component level. I have many calls on service level management, for example, and people are asking me what is generally reported. And, a number of times it's availability of network components, server components, storage components. It's network bandwidth usage. It's, metrics like CPU load, memory consumption, I/O rate, stuff like that. A lot of things that are certainly very useful to administrators and engineers and people in IT operations. But when it comes to the user experience, in 70 to 80% of the case, problems are reported directly by the end user or by their management to the help desk, saying, well, I'm trying to do this and I cannot do it. And then we get into, some kind of a negotiation with the help desk person to really understand or express what problem we have and how it is, manifesting itself. At Forrester, I have this type of dialogue with our help desk in Boston, and our help desk is very wary of analysts because they see us as being know all type of people, and the negotiation is always very tense. But what happens is that when you look into it, and I have had an example recently with a regional bank covering 3 states, where what happened is that they have no visibility really of what's going on in the branches. They got sometimes calls on problems, but what they suspected was that they were in each branch someone, somehow, who knew better or understood better how the application was built. And when they had problems, that person will actually find a go around, a way to perform without telling IT. So there is, and there are, a number of errors at the end user level or problems, because the application interface is not as intuitive as we thought it was. People in general who found ways around the problems that they are experiencing, and therefore they are not reporting them. So, what can we do about that? Next slide. And to, again, reinforce the point. If we look at typical, dashboard that is presented to IT management or business management, there is a lot of stuff in there. There's a lot of, information about application response time, about type of errors, about, usage, workload, etc. Very interesting and very useful, but which doesn't take into account the user experience unless you count that response time is the user experience. Next slide. Actually, talking about end user experience, let's look at how it's done by many vendors out there. Okay? There are fundamentally three types of technology that will capture end user experience. I would say so-called end user experience. The first one, which is the oldest one, started with the web and actually spun off the load testing. Some of you remember Mercury and Load Runner, or are still users of HP Load Runner. The development of synthetic transactions, that is a way to execute a simulated end user using a simulated browser. Now we are using real browser actually, but this type of monitoring was actually appearing around, I would say, the mid-90s, started in the mid-90s, and still very prevalent today in a number of services, especially because people thought it was the only solution to monitor applications where you don't own the endpoint where there is no visibility into the infrastructure, like, for example, cloud computing. So that's one type. The second type is the network appliance. Because people weren't really satisfied with synthetic transactions, because you cannot run a lot of synthetic transactions, because of course you're going to overload your own network and servers and therefore create capacity problems. So, and sometimes it's not even possible. I mean, imagine that I'm running a synthetic transaction against the social security database, so I'm going to create new, persons with numbers, etc. It would be a mess, so difficult sometimes to use. So what appeared in the early 2000s were network appliances. Network appliances were kind of a revolution in the sense that all of a sudden we could, plug an appliance to a switch, okay, to the span port of the switch. Didn't take any resources from the network. It collected, packets, reassembled the packets into incoming and outgoing messages and could measure the response time. And it was sold as end user experience. But it's not end user experience. It's data center experience. Because what you see is actually the performance of all the infrastructure that is in the data center after the switch. What you don't see is what's going on downstream of the switch. What's going that you will find on the market are decoding IP and HTTP protocols, and not much more than that. So, data center centric. Then we came, and actually it was around 1998, we started to see agents on the desktop, on the endpoint, that could capture end user experience by looking at, what the end user was doing, keys that were pressed, transition between windows, blah, that type of thing. And that was really the real end user experience, because now you are at the source of what the end user sees and does. And it really, gives you an independent view, because you're not dependent on, a specific protocol, you're not dependent on a specific technology, you're just looking at what the end user experiences. So you can not only capture performance, but you can capture end user actions. And then there is the latest Force technology, the latest that is used by a number of application performance management solutions, that is Java injection, by which you are injecting in a web page Java applet that will execute when you visualize a web page, and that will actually send back information about your the performance response times there. That's really used in mobile devices, but it has extended to PCs and laptops and stuff like that. Next slide. So, what if we want to look at all these ways of end user experience monitoring, there's not really monitoring end user experience that we've seen, like the network appliance. Very useful for the data center. If your goal is to, measure the performance of the data center, this is the right product. This is why a number of APM solutions are actually using a network appliance. Problem with it, doesn't measure availability because there's no traffic. You don't know what's going on. Okay. The scripted robot, on the other end, gives you information about availability. That's why these two go very often end-to-end in APM the whole spectrum of the user interaction with the application, from login, log out, the path that the user is taking through the application, the type of result it's getting, etc., etc. So that's really now a very different world. It's really the world of how is my application performing from an end user standpoint. What are the things that the end user does that I didn't think about? What are the type of errors that they are experiencing for which they are finding a workaround and actually not calling the help desk? Next slide. So, the question that we had about user productivity. Okay, what is the number of errors at the end user level? What are the things that they are doing where they found their own solution? I think next time, if you go to the check-in counter, which an airline check-in counter, which is, fortunately or unfortunately not so frequent anymore. Sometimes there is a person who is training, and the funny thing is that if you have a very complex problem like rebooking on another flight or another airline, or doing something that's not conventional, you will see that the person opens the drawer and gets a little piece of paper on which there are very arcane ways of doing this operation that is passed from employee to employee. Okay, their own way of using the application, the things that they have learned to do to actually get things done, which weren't really the way the developers saw it. So this type of thing is not reported. You don't know that. As an IT person, you never see that. Okay. The trending of performance is important, because now you're looking at all end users in their unique ways, and you're going to understand how each of them is behaving and how their work is progressing or how their problems are progressing. Okay. You're going to see, mission critical systems like, an SAP or any type of ERP, DRM, etc., packaged application, mainframe application, things that, you normally don't see very often or cannot see at all with the other type of product, because you're not browser-based in all your applications. Okay. Is there a specificity in these errors? Going back to my example of this medium-sized bank, I'm quite sure that if you look into it, one office is behaving a certain way and has a certain type of issues and workaround, and another office will have a slightly different way, etc., etc. I had, one client who is a temporary worker agency, and a lot of their stuff actually happening on a very on a thick client at the desktop level, and for them, understanding how the users are entering, for example, resumes and pairing resumes with jobs available, etc., etc. All that is very critical. There is an interaction with a Java component on the server, etc. But a lot is happening at the desktop level, and that's very critical. And they try to use APM products to make sure that they have the right performance, and they couldn't see anything because they didn't see the real user experience. So the key is also that a business process was created with a certain vision in mind, a certain vision of how applications would be used, how transitions would be done between one step of the process and the next. And there is no way, if you don't understand the end user experience, that you will see whether your users are very productive or not so productive because of their difficulties of using the software. Next slide. So, if we're looking at new KPIs, new key performance indicators from the end user standpoint, we're going to, get more visibility. We're going to make the difference between the objective way of how the end user is behaving and using the application and what type of experience he or she is getting versus the subjective comments that IT gets sometimes, like, well, this application is not working, or, the response time is terrible, or we can't understand, how to get there, etc., etc. So, this will reflect and kind of bridge the business view or the perception of the end user with what IT understands of the end user. And that will eliminate a number of subjective elements and subjective discussion. And at the end, it certainly would be the key to better productivity at the end user level. Next slide.
Thank you, JP. I will at this time turn the presentation over to Joe Negley, who will share a view of the technology set. Thank you.
What I'm going to start with is just showing you one of our potential ways that we can kind of enable IT and the business to get insight into the user experience is by monitoring through our unique solution. We're going to capture all information about application activity out of the box for 100% of the user base. So our unique solution is monitoring at that desktop level, which JP was alluding to. And this is what makes those new key metrics available. It enables full visibility of the users to really give you a true measure of business efficiency, user performance, and user adoption. And the data is going to represent not just a subset of the issues. You can see here I have an example of user issues dashboard displaying a variety of metrics, which we'll talk about in a moment. And this is going to be a real comprehensive view of the issues for all the monitored users in the monitored application. It's not necessarily a subset of the issues that are being reported. This is all issues existing in space. As JP was detailing, if only 1 in 8 user errors is reported, that probably amounts to about 12 to 15%. We're going to give you 100% of the user errors as an example. And again, this is out-of-the-box technology. You can see information about various metrics, not just errors, but in addition to that, we have activity levels like active time, the average response time experienced by each user for all the screens and transactions that they're going through in their day-to-day tasks. So again, more information about the features. We're getting all this information for every application user. And you can see here in my display, if we look left to right, we have the username, we have the active time, average response time, the number of operations. This is equating to, buttons that the user has clicked or, executions of transactions. If you're using your desktop or your laptop and you click a save button, that would be considered an operation. We're getting all this true end-to-end response time. If I can just back up a step. This is true user response time because we're monitoring at that desktop level. By getting that information, it's new insight for the business and for IT. Looking at all these different metrics, the operations, the system errors, and the user errors, and again, across all the applications, by transaction, by individual screen, it's basically facilitating a full view of the landscape with real actionable metrics. We can break this down in a variety of ways. We can slice and dice it, and we can see trend information and tell me, is my business improving? Is my user experience, getting better or getting worse over time, depending on, a critical event. When you're talking about change management, you want to measure efficiency over time, and this will facilitate that. Some of the benefits for this particular dashboard or these particular metrics, this is going to clarify perception versus reality. For example, if you have a user reporting the system is slow, which is a pretty frequent occurrence in any environment, in any application. The users are reporting that it's slow. These metrics will definitely give you exact data, precise data, to tell the support teams in the business and, all the way up to the CIO where the application is slow, exactly how slow, and who is affected. So you have real genuine insight that kind of bridges the gap. It doesn't, it no longer is anecdotal evidence, it's real evidence. Just an example of one of our customers who's reported, potential problems. Say they have a user of a system that's reporting that a particular screen is slow for them, taking approximately 15 seconds. If that screen takes 15 seconds to render, and it's triggered by an operation which on the back end, the database is telling them that the clock time for that operation took only 2 seconds to complete, then there's a bit of a gap between the business side and the IT side. These metrics will bridge that gap by giving them real information to tell them the user perceived response time was this versus that. This clear line of sight is going to enable issue prioritization based on business impact. It's also going to help reduce risk during change management. It's going to enable training opportunities by looking at individual users who need more training or specific areas where training is required. And again, with the trend information, we can track effectiveness of that training over time. You also have the capability to drill down into this information. If you want to see additional detail, this is the full high view of the landscape, but additional detail is easily available by clicking on individual metrics and then drilling into a more detailed report, in this case a summary report of system errors for this particular ERP application experienced by this one user. Simple click brings me to a secondary report which shows me all the detail about that particular user's experience. In this case, it's broken down by module or SAP transaction, and you can see how many errors he's experiencing in each one of the individual modules. Each one of these is probably related to a critical business process, which could be, executing sales orders or a quarter-end process, which really has meaning to the business. And again, this data will bridge the gap between IT and the business. In addition to that particular dashboard, I'd like to show a different one to give you a little bit of a different insight. This one is giving me information specifically about user errors. So JP talked about how are you going to quantify user errors in a given environment or in a system when that data isn't necessarily available through other APM tools. For example, your business wants to run efficiently, but you really need to be able to measure that to be able to improve that efficiency of how things are run. And measuring information about the network times and the database clock time or the amount of time it takes to execute a transaction is valuable, but the business is ultimately run by people. So information about the user experience at that desktop level is where you can really get information that has high value towards driving up that productivity and driving up that business efficiency. This data, for example, will show you all the transactions where users are experiencing errors in a given system that's being monitored. Again, it's capturing information at the desktop level and getting 100% of the errors, in this case for each individual transaction that might be related to the most important piece of the business process that's been designed. So just to pick up, we're looking at a user error dashboard to give me, again, a nice view of the landscape and tell me what pieces of the application that are related to my business are experiencing problems. Where are users running into causing errors, and how is that breaking down? So again, our agent-based technology is going to capture 100% of the messages that are perceived by the user base. So any type of user error or system error or any informational message will be captured right out of the box. In this case, we're focused on user errors, and this is going to give us insight into what the user experience related, again, to a business process will be. This same agent-based technology, again, will capture all the errors from different applications like SAP or Salesforce or Oracle. You know, the difference between particular solutions, whether it's an ERP or a CRM solution, really doesn't matter. We like to say that our application or our solution is agnostic to the information that's being executed by the users, because we're keying in on the user interface and not necessarily the content. So whether or not it's an ERP solution or a CRM solution that we're monitoring, the data model for how we're outputting this report information is going to be the same. So we're actually getting information related to the users, not only specifically about the transactions, but we can actually look at the individual messages themselves and how many users are affected by those individual messages. Once we've got an area which we'd like to pinpoint, we can select that particular error message or transaction. In this case, I'll select one where it's a permissions issue, a error caused by authorization or security roles that are not necessarily properly configured. You can see the raw error message at the top. So we're capturing the full raw error message that's being produced by the application as it's perceived by the user. You also have the ability to break that down and give it contextual information like where the actual error occurred. You can see on the right-hand side here, we have a breakdown by our integrated user attribute. Different pieces of information like the actual site or location, or the department that a user works in, or a functional role. These can all give additional insight into what the errors are related to and who's experiencing them and where. We also have a breakdown of the individual users, in this case, where they're having more errors versus fewer errors. You can see we have a kind of a scope of a particular group of errors in a specific department. And you can see that probably 25% of the actual users in that area are causing the majority of the errors. This is where you can get insight to deliver that targeted training. So someone who would like to actually design some training content for a sales team, if you have some new employees who are trying to execute sales orders, and let's say that this one at the left side of the spectrum is a new employee who's having about 10 or 15 errors per day. That's someone who requires additional training. It's easily identified here using this type of report. And you can also discern the content that's needed by clicking on that particular user and going to a detailed report to see exactly where did they run into trouble and what was the error related to. That drill down capability is very similar to the other dashboard, where you'll go from a summary dashboard to a detailed report. So what can we do with this type of information? What type of benefits can we assume? This is going to be, as JP was talking about, giving us the ability to not only react to users who are opening help desk tickets, but to actually help them proactively. The IT service desk now can see and resolve issues which have yet to be reported. So again, 100% of the user experienced issues is captured through the solution. So it's not necessarily only that 12 to 15% that is reported. So the reduced number of tickets going to the support organization is enabled through this solution. You can also reduce issues collectively as opposed to a one-on-one type situation. If one particular authorization issue, like this permissions error which we're seeing at the top, is affecting, as you can see, about 10 users, perhaps this is related to a misconfigured security role. That solution is not necessarily related to the one user, it's related to the security role, which was not configured in the right way. So by enabling IT to see this problem in detail, they can actually triage that faster. They can actually remediate the problem by fixing the security role, and you've now solved the problem for 10 people collectively through only one course of action. The result is a much more efficient IT service desk, much greater efficiency for IT servicing the business. They're resolving problems for the business faster. This is creating a direct effect to increase user satisfaction. It's going to drive up the adoption rate and lead to increased productivity. So, enabling an organization with these new metrics will have a pretty amazing ripple effect to basically drive up the user experience and the user productivity across the board. It also potentially will enable sustainable training organizations, which we talked about briefly. It also gives detailed visibility into users who need that training, and again, where the content of the training is and how that training should be delivered. You can also measure the training effectiveness over time by looking again at a trend type graph to show me, and this is in the bottom right with the green and blue graph lines, you can see the user errors and the users experiencing those errors over time, and this will determine whether or not you're seeing users becoming more efficient in the process that they use on a day-to-day basis. Targeted training, again, enabled, and this results in a better trained workforce. If you have new hires and you have a tool like this, you can decrease the cost of competency by resolving the issues they're experiencing faster. Finally, I'd like to point out that we also have the user workflow. User workflow view, as I switch to that, again, will enable things for an IT organization to do a lot more efficient processing of user issues or system issues. The detail that you're seeing here is basically that the workflow view has a step-by-step view of a user's business process. So the business process, originated as a concept. The business users wanted to make an investment in, say, an ERP solution like this example. They designed a business process. Now we have an easy-to-access and interpret view of that to connect the conceptual view with the real user-executed workflow. The features of this are that it's enabled for every user. So again, 100% of the user base will have their workflow available, and this will be something available for the IT service desk or the training organization, CIO, whoever would like to view their information about how they're executing their particular job. It's easily accessed in this view. All you would need would be the user's ID and the date that they executed some activity. The full activity is captured from the moment they log on to the moment they log off, even including any inactive or idle time. So if a user switches to a separate session, you can see multiple sessions for this ERP application. They're executing multiple transactions at once. If they switch to some other activity, if they step away for a phone call or a meeting, the solution will actually track that as idle time and not consider it part of the true active time within the application. The view will show all screens, all views, applets, operations, messages of all types, all with a timestamp of that activity or event. So in the example of an error, you can see a user error here in yellow in the middle. We actually have the steps that occurred both before and after the user error. So it's really significant insight that can enable, again, the IT service desk user support organization. Again, the benefit is this is basically giving clear picture of the user's workflow. It's no longer a concept. It's no longer described via word of mouth. It's in clear metrics. This is enabling greater visibility for IT. This is giving them the ability to triage and resolve issues much faster. They're reducing mean time to resolution for existing tickets by using this real data. They're also going to be able to reduce the discovery and investigation time by eliminating the need to recreate issues or take screenshots. There's no need for a lengthy interrogation or investigation. If this user reports a problem, again, all the user support organization needs is their name and the date that the issue occurred. They can pull up the workflow, and 2 hours to investigate and resolve a level 1 ticket now can potentially be reduced to 20 minutes. Again, IT is better equipped to meet or exceed SLAs for ticket resolution, and in most cases